All right, let's talk about domain-driven design. Now, this isn't just another buzzword or a fancy set of coding patterns. It's a whole philosophy, a strategic way to tackle real-world complexity in software. We're going to dive into how you can take those tricky business rules and turn them into an architecture that's not just working, but is actually built to last. Let's get into it. You know the feeling, right? We've all been there. You crack open a project, maybe one you even wrote, and the code just doesn't speak the business language. You see these generic names like order service or manager controller, but the actual heart of the business, the logic, is completely buried. Trying to figure out a single process, like a product return, feels like detective work, tracing a single thread through a tangled mess of services. That hesitation, that fear of touching our own code, that's not just you. It's a huge red flag that our design is broken. Let me tell you a quick and kind of painful real-world story. A team is in the middle of a huge demo for a potential investor. Everything's on the line. But during registration, the SMS confirmation fails. The CEO, feeling the heat, turns to a support engineer and says, "Just make the user registered, now." So what does the engineer do? He does what he's told. He goes straight into the database and flips the is-registered flag to true. Simple, right? Wrong. He completely bypassed all the application logic, breaking a complex state machine. The next click the investor made, boom, an HTTP 500 error. The demo was a disaster. And that, right there, is the perfect example of a defenseless, anemic model. So that whole mess, it wasn't just bad luck. It was practically inevitable. It was the direct result of a really common but deeply flawed way of thinking about software design. So let's pull back the curtain and look at the traditional approach that creates this kind of fragile, scary code. So on the one hand, you've got the old-school, data-driven way. We start with the database, right? We design our tables, then we create these simple classes that are basically just bags of data to hold what's in those tables. All the real work, all the business logic gets shoved into these giant, clunky service classes. But DDD? It completely flips that on its head. We start with the business itself, its processes, its rules. We build a rich model of that business domain in our code. And the database? Well, the database just becomes an implementation detail. It's important for sure, but it's not where we start. And this data-first way of thinking, it creates something we call an anemic domain model. I like to call them zombie objects. Think about it. They look alive, they hold data, but they have no brains, no behavior. The object itself has no idea about the business rules that are supposed to govern its own data. All the intelligence is somewhere else, which leaves the object totally defenseless against being put into a bad state, which is exactly what happened in that investor demo.
Okay, so how do we fight off the zombies? How do we fix this? Well, DDD suggests a pretty radical shift. It's not just about writing different code. It's about communication. It's about building a solid bridge between the tech world and the business world. And the absolute foundation for that bridge is what we call the ubiquitous language. This is a shared vocabulary that everyone, developers and business experts, agrees on and uses. So when a business expert says a customer places a policy, the code shouldn't say insert into contracts. That's a bad translation. You're losing meaning. The rule is simple. If the business calls it a policy, your class is named policy. If they talk about accruing a bonus, your method is named accrue bonus. The language of the business literally becomes the language of your code.
And the end game here is honestly pretty profound. Your code stops being just a bunch of technical instructions. It transforms into an executable, living specification of the business itself. We're not trying to hide the complexity anymore. We're trying to model the actual business complexity as clearly as we can. When a domain expert can sit in on a code review, look at your class names and methods, and actually understand the business process you've built, well, that's when you know you've nailed it.
But, language is tricky, right? Words can mean different things to different people, especially in a big company. And this is where a really powerful strategic tool comes in, the bounded context. You can think of a bounded context as an explicit boundary, a line in the sand where a specific model and its language are consistent and have one unambiguous meaning.
Okay, let's take a super simple word, product. To the sales team, what's a product? It's about marketing copy, pretty images, price, and ratings. But go talk to the warehouse team. To them, a product is something totally different. It's about weight, dimensions, where it is on a shelf, and how many we have. Now, the old way would be to try and build one giant, monstrous product class for everyone. DDD says, don't do that. It's a terrible idea. Instead, you create a product model for your sales context and a completely separate product model for your warehouse context. They are different concepts, and that is perfectly okay. This right here is the secret to designing clean, maintainable microservices.
All right,
So we've talked about the big picture stuff, language and boundaries. Now let's get tactical. Let's look at the actual building blocks we use to create these rich models. How do we write code that isn't a defenseless zombie, but is actually an intelligent guardian of our business rules?
Let's see how this looks in practice. Look at the anemic order on the left. It's got a public set status method. That means any part of the system can come along and change its state whenever it wants, possibly breaking all sorts of business rules. It's defenseless. But now look at the rich order on the right. Its data is private. You can't just change the status. You have to call a method that expresses a business action, like ship order. And that method is the guardian. It's responsible for checking things like, hey, has this order been paid for, before it allows the state to change. It protects itself.
So our first tool in the toolbox is the entity. What makes an object an entity isn't its data, but its identity, its continuous existence over time. An order is a perfect example. The status might change, items might be added, but it's still the same order, tracked by a unique ID. We care about this specific order through its entire life, which makes its identity the most important thing about it.
Now, the flip side of an entity is the value object. A value object is defined purely by its attributes, by its value. Think about an address or an amount of money like $100. We don't care about the unique identity of a specific $100 value. We only care that its value is $100. And here's the really important part. Value objects are immutable. If an address changes, you don't edit the existing address object. You create a brand new one and replace the old one.
And this is so important because value objects help us avoid a really common trap called primitive obsession. This is what happens when we use basic types like strings and integers for everything. You have a string variable, but is it a name, an email, a phone number? Who knows? The validation logic is scattered everywhere. But if we create a tiny email value object, we can put the validation logic right inside its constructor. From that point on, if your code receives an email object, you have a rock-solid guarantee that it's a validly formatted email. The logic lives in one and only one place. So, we have these entities and value objects. How do we group them together logically? Well, for that we use the aggregate pattern. An aggregate is just a cluster of related objects that we always want to treat as a single unit. Think about an order and all of its order line items. They belong together. The order itself acts as the single entry point to this whole cluster. We call it the aggregate roots. Its job is to make sure that the entire group of objects is always in a consistent, valid state.
And honestly, the best way to think about this is like a family. You don't just walk into someone's house and start telling their kids what to do, right? No, you talk to the parents. It's the same here. You don't reach inside an order aggregate and mess with a line item directly. You talk to the order object itself, the aggregate root, and you say, hey, please update this item for me. The order will then handle that change, making sure everything, like the total price, gets recalculated and all the rules are followed. It's a boundary of consistency.
Okay, these patterns are super powerful. But, and this is a big but, using them everywhere is a classic mistake that leads to massive over-engineering. The real skill is knowing where to apply this effort. So, how do we figure that out? Well, this is where we go back to our strategic thinking.
First, you have to look at your business and break it down into what we call subdomains. At the very heart, you have your core domain. This is your secret sauce. It's the complex, unique logic that makes your business special. This is where you put your best people and use the full power of DDD. Then, you have supporting subdomains. This is stuff that's necessary for the business to run, like a simple reporting module, but it's not why customers choose you. A much simpler design is usually fine here. And finally, you have generic subdomains. These are solved problems, like sending emails or authenticating users. The rule here is simple. Buy it or use an open source solution. Don't build it. This focus is key to investing your energy where it actually counts. So with all that in mind, let's make this crystal clear. DDD is a powerful and sometimes heavy set of tools. You wouldn't use a sledgehammer to hang a picture frame. Knowing when not to use DDD is just as important as knowing when to use it. There are a few really common traps people fall into. The first one is what I call folder-driven design. You create all the right folders, domain, application, infrastructure. It looks great, but then you fill them with the same old anemic procedural code. You're just copying the structure without the soul. Other big mistakes are trying to use DDD for every simple little CRUD app, and this is the biggest one, getting obsessed with the technical patterns, but forgetting to actually talk to the business experts. Remember, DDD starts with conversations, not with code. So here's a quick cheat sheet for you. Ask yourself,
Is my business logic really complex? And is it the core asset of my company? Am I building something that needs to last and evolve for years? Am I working in a field like fintech or logistics? If you're nodding yes, then DDD is probably an excellent fit. But if you're building a simple blog, a basic data entry app, or you have a super tight deadline for something simple, DDD is probably overkill. It'll just slow you down. Use the right tool for the job. And that really brings us to the most important thing I want you to walk away with today. It is so easy to get caught up in the patterns, aggregates, value objects, all of it. But those are just the tools. They are not the goal. Domain-driven design is not a framework you can just npm install. It is a fundamental shift in how you think. It's a commitment to putting the business domain at the very center of everything you do.
So if you remember just one thing from all of this, let it be this. Stop designing your software from the database up. Start by obsessing over the meaning, the behavior, and the language of your business domain. Build code that protects its own rules, speaks the same language as your business, and truly models reality. Because that is how you build software that matters and software that lasts.